And you are allowed to smile, by the way.
Cost extra.
Is it slipping? Is the thing moving?
No?
Your head keeps going down. I'm making sure it's not moving. Okay. I think that's good. What we're going to do is... Yeah, I think that'll work. Okay. So we're going to talk about some of the stories in your book. And you can help me fill in the blanks of stuff that I don't remember. So you said Grandpa Raymond's dad was Henry Bott and his mom was Victoria Lucinda Atkinson, and that was Grandma Wilkerson. And she was Uncle Mac's sister.
Correct.
So Uncle Mac was Grandpa. So who was Uncle Mac? He was Grandma. Oh, okay. Uncle Mac was Grandma Wilkerson's brother.
Correct.
And then Gilbert,
Agatha was Uncle Mac and Aunt Bessie's daughter, only daughter.
Well, who was Alan? Was that Agatha's?
Alan was Agatha's husband.
Oh,
Alan
was
stout.
blood. He was by
He
marriage.
was a stout, and he married a Pamplin,
Oh.
Agatha Pamplin. Daddy was an Atkinson and an only child. And so his mother and Agatha's daddy were brother and sister. That made them first cousins. But since they both were only children, they really were like brother and sister.
There was something in here that said, yeah, it said they were like brother and sister. I wish I would have underlined some of this, but said they were like brother and sister, but I didn't understand. It seemed like there was something missing, but we'll go through here. So they moved. So this is Henry Bott, so that's Grandpa's dad, Henry Bott, Grandpa Raymond's dad.
Correct.
He was a brakeman. And then they still lived then they moved back to Northview. Okay, he died of appendicitis in 1915. So he died when Raymond was 4. Okay.
And Henry Bott died in a hospital in Springfield, Missouri. And so that's how we can place when he came back to Northview. It was after he was terminated from the job in Kansas City, and before he died in Springfield,
Mm-hmm.
he moved back. And that places Grandma Atkinson,
Mm-hmm.
a.k.a. Wilkerson, there.
Okay.
Her mother was a Welch, and so she lived with her mother.
Okay.
And by the way, that Northview Cemetery is called the Welch Cemetery. So she lived with her mother after Grandpa died. There was no aid to dependent children. There was no Social Security. When a widow was left as a widow without any money, she must depend upon the church and family.
And then Grandpa Raymond was one of her students when she taught school.
Yes. And the way she got to be able to teach school, being left without any money, was she stayed with her mother, and apparently the Welches had some money. And so she was able to go to college and get an associate's degree. And then that's all you needed to teach school was a 2-year college.
So
And she went to Springfield Teachers College, which later became known as Southwest Missouri State, which now is known as Missouri State.
So, this thing about, she married PL in 1928, but Grandpa Raymond didn't graduate from high school until 1930. So where was she when he was on his own? She was living in Rogersville. And where was he? He was in Salem. Why was he in Salem? That's where she used to live?
Yeah, that's where.
And she got married and moved with Grandpa Wilkerson and left him in Salem with some neighbors or friends or something?
Salem, yes. I think the Coppages, I think it was the Coppages that he lived with until he finished high school. And she moved to Rogersville, Missouri to join her husband, P.L., who had a big farm. That's near Springfield.
So he had a fast car and he did some kind of secret work, but you don't think he was running booze because he never drank, and he would have been churched from the Church of Christ if they found that out.
We don't know what was going on. I've discussed it with Jerry and Jim, and you know, it all adds up. He wrote letters home to Mother saying, I've got a job here in Kansas City. I can't really talk about it much. But, so, filling in the blanks, we thought, well, pretty sure he's not working for the FBI or doesn't have a security clearance. What could it be? We don't know. And he may be laughing and saying, I didn't intend anything like that. All we know is he was doing something. He had a fast car. He loved V8 Fords.
Do you think he could have justified that somehow?
I don't know. Yeah, when you're 19 on your own.
Yeah, maybe he had to.
Maybe.
So, you were born in Grandpa and Grandma Nelson's farmhouse, and where was that?
Well, the address listed on my birth certificate says Howe's Mill.
Right.
The mill was named after Mr. Howe, H.O.
Is that the same mill where Grandpa would take the logs down and saw them to make the house that he built?
It was. And the reason I was born there was because Mother and Daddy got married and moved to Salem, which I think was 17 miles from Grandpa's house. And they didn't know anybody there. They didn't have money to go to a hospital. And so it was rather common in those days just to go back to Mom and Daddy's house to have the baby. So that's why they went out there.
Making sure this is still running. I can't see the bottom. There, all right.
They went out there just to stay until I was born, which is what they did. Then came back to Salem when I was a week or so old. I was told that the first place I ever went was to church, and I think I was a week old. That's the story I heard.
So I remember going to Grandpa Nelson's house when I was probably real little, and I just have a vague memory of being sort of in the back of the house, the backyard, and it was just like a white frame house. Would that have been later? Did he move after that? So did he build the house that I saw, or he built?
I don't think you ever went to the house I was born in. I went back there when I was either in college or shortly thereafter, and there was nothing but a foundation. I had my picture made sitting on the foundation, and I don't know where that picture is. I wish I had it. Very small
So the house that,
It was gone by the time you were born.
where did he go after that? It says in here, but
Well, if I remember correctly, he moved from there to Lenox. No, he moved from there to Salem, then to Lenox, where he owned the store. When I was in college, that's where he was. The store was an old-fashioned store with a potbelly stove and a post office and gas pumps out front. That was Lenox. There may have been two houses somewhere.
so is that where I would have been to his house?
That's probably where you were.
Okay.
And then from there, and he had different wives at different
Yeah,
places.
that was interesting.
That's
I
all in
didn't,
there. But he moved to Salem and bought a hotel. And that's when he married Ernie Bates' daughter.
so the photograph of you in 35, is that the little one? You look like Little Boy Blue, the big black and white picture up there?
Yeah, it's the one that's in the hallway. Yeah, and I still remember that picture being made because, number one, I'd never seen a photographer or a camera. Number two, everybody made a really big deal out of it because for people as poor as we were, to have a professional photographer come and take a picture, I mean, that was just unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
It made such an impression on me, I still remember. And I was a year old or a little over.
Huh.
I wish my memories for what I had for dinner last night were as good as
So
what I remember about 1 year old.
cousin Shirley was your cousin, right?
Second cousin.
Gaitha and Alan's daughter, only daughter.
Right. And remember, Gaitha and Daddy were first cousins. That made us second cousins.
The thing I expected to read in here is your why you hate dogs, and I had a theory after reading this that you lived there and she had dogs and you went and played with the dogs and the pony and it was just good memories, and then you got yanked out of there and had to move. And do you think is there any way that you just didn't like dogs after that because it got all taken away from you?
I don't know. That's as good a theory as any.
Do you remember feeling sad that when you moved that you didn't get to play with the pony and see Shirley and the dogs and all that?
No, I don't remember that at all. What I remember is because I was so materialistic, what I remember is we were moving up to a much, much nicer house. And that did away with any other memories of not having a pony
Maybe you just
or dogs.
decided that dogs were associated with poverty and you didn't like dogs because they were like,
Well, we had a dog most of the time. We had a dog named Troubles, I remember.
yeah.
And we had a dog on Pickwick, and I remember a story about Daddy taking the dog out finally in the garage and shooting it. But I can't corroborate that story with anybody. Jerry and Jim don't remember it. But I remember that story.
And was it traumatic to you hearing that, or?
I know, I kind of think I thought good riddance.
There has to be something deeply hidden somewhere in your
I don't know.
psyche about dogs for you to dislike them that much when you don't remember ever getting bit by one or ever having one that somebody took away from you, or
When we
like
lived,
I did many times in my childhood.
we had dogs when I was growing up, and when we lived on Delaware, we had a dachshund, a black dachshund,
Mamie or something? What is the name of that dog?
Hildegard,
Hilda.
German,
Would I have remembered that? Seeing that dog
probably, yeah.
when I was real little?
Yeah, I remember one time when we had a deep snow in Springfield, and Hildegard went out in the yard, and every time she would jump, she'd disappear. Because little short legs and the snow was deeper. Daddy trained Hildegard. You know, today, well, we called her Hilda. Today, people put electronic fences around their house. Well, he didn't have the money for that, but he was smarter. So he took his deep sea fishing pole and he attached Hilda to the other end. And he let Hilda run till she came to the edge of the property. And then he yanked it, and she stopped. When he thought she was sufficiently trained, he let her run by herself. And you know what happened? She would run to the edge of the property and stop. That's how he trained her. He also didn't like dogs running around the house and jumping on people. So the house that I had designed for them that they lived in had about a 1 foot step down from the main house to the family room. So he trained Hilda the same way. He said, you can go anywhere in the house as long as it's this room. And she would not jump up that little 1 foot. She would not jump up on the couches. She would not jump up on people. She was trained. Which, I might add, was exactly the same way he trained his 3 sons. He believed in boundaries. Just like Hilda couldn't go beyond the property line, he said, you boys have boundaries. And he made the analogy to going down a road with fences on both sides. He said, you can go anywhere down this road, but you can't cross those fences. And those were our boundaries. They were immutable forces that we were not to contend with. And it worked for a long time for me.
While we were talking about the house, and so I didn't really realize you had told me you designed those houses, but I thought it was just kind of back of the napkin, drawing it out. And I never realized that you were actually a draftsman and kind of, did all that. But when you're talking about Grandma's house and how that was just going to be a utility room going into the garage, and how he didn't want to cut the tree down, and so he made it into a living room that nobody had back then.
A family room.
And that was the tree that I fell out of, and Grandma cut it down. When I broke my arm, we were playing at her.
I didn't know that. Is that the one?
That's the one. It had to be in the front of the house.
Well, the side.
Well, I call that the front because that's where you drove in, and the front of the house, nobody used the front entrance.
Nobody used
the front was where you drove your car in the gravel driveway, and then you walked in, and there was a tree right there. That must have been the same tree.
Well, that was the tree.
He didn't want to cut down, and she cut it down when I fell and broke my arm. I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, I didn't know that, or I would have tried to
You
stop
knew that,
it.
didn't you?
Well,
I
guess
playing-
I knew it at the time, but I
well, it
forgot.
wouldn't fit historically chronologically in the story because it was much later, but it just was funny to me because that you built the house around it and then she cut it down. I was out there and I was playing like I was in an airplane, and there was a little piece of a branch sticking up, and that was my joystick. And I yanked back on the joystick and I flipped over on my head and landed on my arm, broke my arm.
Well, now,
And
was
so when
that, was
and there's
that,
the stump there ever since after that, as long as
well,
I
I
can
remember the stump when we went back.
But I think
after
that's
many
the same
times.
tree.
But was that when you saw your angel?
I don't remember. Maybe.
That
That might have been on Kane Court when I broke my arm real bad.
could
I
be.
don't remember.
Anyway, that tree was there at the right time and caused us to build a house that was much, much nicer than originally would have been.
So you said there was the lot next door was the house, the place for Annie's house. They built Annie's house, right?
To the north of us was
And
Amy.
then, but you said there was the road kind of ran out there, and then there was an empty lot that was sort of an easement or something that you shared. So where was that? You'd come down, and
Would
the
you-
road ended, and then there was like a gravel driveway going back to these two houses. Where was the empty lot?
That was it.
Oh, in between there, and you just put a driveway in it.
Between our house and the house to the
Ah.
south of us, there was this big gravel driveway. And if you stood in that driveway after driving in and turned around to look back, you would see a road that went, a
Oh, yeah.
paved road that went all the way
Way
to
down.
Kearney. I mean, all the way to Glenstone. Well, that road came up there and the city had right of way to go right on through. But somehow their right of way stopped and the street going the other direction, they just built houses on. So the city sat there and said, what do we do now? We can't tear those houses down. And if we did, we would only go one block, and then we can't cross that because that was Campbell's pasture. So they just said, we give in. We're not going to use it. So Daddy bought his lot and the lot next door and said, great, I can use it as my yard. I can make a driveway out of it. And I don't have to pay the taxes because I don't own it.
How much would that have cost them back then, those two lots?
I don't remember exactly, but it was on the order of $700 or $800 for the two lots, and that
The right of
included
way.
the freeway. Now I do remember how much the total cost of the house was. Did I put that in my memos?
Yeah, I think that's in here.
The house and the lot cost $10,000.
So, let's see. You told me you're talking about a Grandpa's Studebaker, Indianapolis Speedway. And I thought you told me he could put it up against a wall and pop the clutch and the back tires would spin.
Yeah. Had a lot of torque.
Well, where am I at here? Oh, okay. So, Uncle Bob maybe sold his patent and he had a factory. He built a factory to manufacture razors, but why didn't he ever run it?
When I was going to school at Rolla,
And that was Grandpa Raymond's Uncle Bob. No.
no, that was that was his uncle, because it was Uncle Mac and
Yeah, yeah.
Grandma's brother.
Yeah, Grandma Wilkerson's brother.
Right,
So that made it Grandpa Raymond's uncle.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. But Uncle Mac and Uncle Bob, and Aunt Mattie, they were great. But I never put the great on there. They were my uncles.
Well, just like Uncle Kenny's my uncle, but he's my great uncle.
Well, I wish I had gotten more information at the time, but when we were driving back and forth to Rolla, Daddy pointed out the remains of a big brick building that he said, that's Uncle Bob's, and he built a factory there and he was going to build electric razors. And I said, well, what happened? He didn't do it. No, he sold, I think he said he sold the rights, or not sure what happened. But it would have been back, when he did that, it would have been back in the 1930s.
Hmm.
And you didn't go down and buy an electric razor in the 1930s. I suspect what he did is sell his patents.
But you could research that. Somebody could probably research that.
Jerry ought to do that, I'll tell him. But now Uncle Bob
Oh.
Go ahead.
No. What?
I was going to say, Uncle Bob had a son named Shirley. And he would have been a first cousin to my daddy. And he worked in Venezuela in the oil fields and was I met him just one time, but all anybody ever said was he's a big, rich oil man. Probably was rich.
You mentioned in here, and I was thinking about this as something you should add to your book, but you were talking about the garage in the house. You didn't go into much detail about the garage at the Delaware house, but you said here that Ernie and Daddy both like cars and like to work on them. And I don't think I realized until maybe your 80th birthday, when talking to Jim or you or both, that Grandpa Raymond you said he could take an entire car apart and then put it back together. Nobody ever taught him how to do that. And he had the garage built out so he could, I think there was like a crawl space or an attic, or I remember climbing up in there and going up on top of the garage. It wasn't like a room, but it was some kind of storage space up there. But
He had a pull-down staircase and an attic, floored attic above the garage. He also had enough strength in the rafters. It was actually a truss that he built, so that he rigged up a hoist, and this is, I guess I didn't mention any of that, but when he bought the 46 Oldsmobile, cars only ran about 30,000 miles back then before the engines had to be overhauled. And so he drove the Oldsmobile in the garage, took the hood off, took the engine out. Using his hoist, he pulled the engine up and then moved it over and set it on a table and took it completely apart and rebuilt it.
how do you rebuild it?
Well, he took the heads off, and then he took the pistons out and took the rings off.
Just get new
Pulled
rings
all
and put
the
in there?
valves out. In those days, it was known as grinding the valves, because the valves
Build the deposits from lead.
So they ground off and made them smooth again, put on new rings so the rings would fit neatly in the bore, in the cylinder. And in talking to Jim a few months ago when he was here, I didn't remember this, but he said, and he would have been at that time 12 or 13 years old. He said, I was with Daddy when he was doing that. And he showed me how every time you take a piece out, you lay it in a certain place and you label it. And so he said we took that whole engine apart and he knew where every piece came from, how to put it all back together. And he said that's how I learned to do it. I think that's why Jim can take a car apart, take a clock apart, can do anything Daddy could do. Because while I was off drawing houses, and while Jerry was reading books on Shakespeare, Jim was watching what Daddy was doing. And so that's why Jim was Daddy's favorite and I was Mother's favorite.
What was Jerry?
Jerry was Auntie and Scotty's favorite. And they will tell you that.
Huh.
The only thing Daddy couldn't do was take a hydromatic drive apart and put it back together.
Hmm.
Hydromatics were relatively new back then. We were the only people who had an automatic transmission car. They're very rare. And I say the only thing he couldn't do, it's the only thing he didn't try to do.
Hmm.
I have a feeling if he took it apart, he could have put it back together.
Well, some of those things probably you had to buy a lot of parts to fix. Like if you were taking apart a transmission, you'd have bands. I guess back then they're kind of rubber band type things in there, and probably parts you'd have to buy versus things you could grind down and fix.
Yeah, that's true.
You still have the lunchbox your dad had? Where is that? Have I ever seen it?
I don't know. It's in the laundry room up on that shelf.
You have to show me when
I'll
we
show
get
you.
down
I've
there.
also got Annie's camera.
I like that. I thought that was really good that Grandpa said coffee doesn't keep you awake, your conscience does.
I've quoted that to so many people.
That's pretty good. What else? Oh, I just thought of something I wanted to ask and I can't. Oh, the one thing I was going to ask, I'm not going in any order here, but the story about Uncle Kenny coming to church and the preacher asked him if he was baptized, the version I always heard was he told him he'd go into hell.
I don't think he used those words. I was there, but what all I remember was that he said, you ought to be, or you need to be. It's very possible, knowing Uncle Kenny and knowing Milton Truex, it's very possible that he did say something like, well, you can't go to heaven unless you've been baptized.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he would have used the word hell at that point. The thought was there.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what he meant.
Uncle Kenny got the point. If you're not baptized into this Church of Christ in this building, he said, well, I'll just show you. I'll go to heaven and I won't do it.
And it's non-transferable. If you get baptized someplace else, it doesn't count either, right?
There was another incident, I'll tell you now, I'll probably forget it later. Much, much later, when we were all grown and we were in, I don't think you